by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
The document was never supposed to surface this way. Yet inside a restricted royal file carrying Queen Elizabeth II's authority was a decree capable of changing the emotional balance of the monarchy in a single morning. When Camilla learned exactly what it said, the shock was immediate. Elizabeth had formally established Catherine's precedence above her in matters tied to continuity, representation, and the future crown. And suddenly, an old royal tension became impossible to hide. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move when the sealed file was placed before her at Windsor. Charles remained standing nearby, while senior advisors waited in silence, each aware that the paper carried instructions preserved under restricted access since the final period of Elizabeth's reign. A royal decree, in this context, was a written sovereign instruction intended to establish how particular duties or positions should be handled. This one was brutally specific. Elizabeth had ordered that Catherine, Princess of Wales, would outrank the Queen Consort whenever defined questions of crown representation, succession-related ceremony, and continuity of the future monarchy were involved. The words landed harder because they left almost no room for interpretation. Camilla read the decisive paragraph once, then again, her eyes returning to the same sentence as if repetition might somehow change it. It did not. The decree protected the direct line of succession by stating that marriage to a reigning monarch could not automatically override authority, deliberately reserved for the heir's household. For Camilla, that meant years of standing beside Charles could not erase the boundary Elizabeth had placed around William and Catherine's future. Charles watched her expression change and said nothing at first. He understood why the instruction mattered. William would one day inherit the crown, and Catherine would stand beside him as the woman expected to help carry the monarchy into its next reign. But he also understood what the decree meant emotionally for his wife. Challenging his mother's written order could appear to place his marriage above the succession itself. Obeying it meant asking Camilla to accept that Elizabeth had quietly limited how far her authority could ever reach. Then came the detail that transformed shock into something more dangerous. Catherine had never been shown the complete wording. Elizabeth had structured the instruction so that it could take effect without Kate demanding recognition, fighting for position, or confronting Camilla personally. That realization removed the easiest explanation. There had been no secret campaign by Catherine, no private victory negotiated behind closed doors. The decision had come from Elizabeth herself. Camilla folded the decree once, placed it carefully on the table, and withdrew her hand. Charles stayed beside her chair, waiting for anger, disbelief, anything. Instead, she looked directly at him and asked the one question capable of turning a constitutional instruction into a deeply personal crisis. Did Catherine know? But the decree was only devastating because of the 4 people trapped inside its consequences, and each of them had something very different to lose. For Camilla, the decree was not merely about protocol. It touched the deepest insecurity of her royal life, whether acceptance had ever truly become belonging. For Catherine, it created an equally uncomfortable burden, granting her authority she had never publicly demanded. Between them stood Charles and William, one protecting his wife, the other protecting the future crown. Suddenly, rank was no longer ceremonial. It had become painfully personal. Camilla carried the wound away from that first meeting long after the decree had been folded and left behind. She had survived years of hostility, public judgment, and the slow process of being accepted beside Charles. Now the Queen Consort faced something far harder to dismiss, a limitation created from inside the family itself. She told the king privately that criticism from strangers had never frightened her as much as this. Those voices could be ignored. Elizabeth's decision could not. To her, it felt like a judgment designed to outlive the woman who had written it. Charles listened without interrupting. He knew his wife had spent years building a place beside him, but he also understood why Catherine occupied a different position in Elizabeth's thinking. She was married to the direct heir and was raising the generation expected to follow William. That made her role part of dynastic continuity. The simple idea that the crown must pass clearly from one generation to the next, without confusion over who represents its future. The distinction sounded cold. Inside the family, it cut deeply. William found Catherine equally unsettled when they spoke alone. She did not look triumphant. She looked trapped. The princess understood that every advantage created by the decree could be presented as a personal victory over Camilla, even though she had never asked for the contest. "I will not celebrate another woman's humiliation," she told him. William chose his answer carefully. This is no longer ours to refuse. He had not written the instruction either, but surrendering it could weaken the protection Elizabeth had deliberately placed around their future. Then Charles learned something that made the silence around the decree even more significant. Before her death, Elizabeth had spoken privately with William about Catherine's long-term place within the monarchy. The prince had never seen the final wording, yet the conversation showed that his grandmother had been thinking far beyond one ceremony or one disagreement. She had been planning for investitures, state occasions, royal councils, and moments when the public would need to see immediately who represented continuity. Catherine felt the pressure of that realization almost immediately. The decree was not simply placing her ahead in a room. It could shape who stood closest to the future crown when the monarchy entered periods of uncertainty. That authority carried weight, but it also carried danger. Every appearance could now be interpreted as evidence of someone rising while someone else fell. And that raised the question nobody inside the palace could avoid much longer. Why had Elizabeth believed such protection was necessary in the first place? The answer led back to one private confrontation, one moment at Windsor that had changed everything. Years before the decree stunned Camilla, one private ceremony created the fracture that Elizabeth never forgot. It appeared insignificant from the outside, a question of placement, representation, and who would stand where during a restricted royal engagement. Inside the palace, however, the disagreement exposed something much larger. Elizabeth saw two competing ideas of monarchy collide in front of her, and according to the decree's internal record, that was the moment she decided the future line required protection. Elizabeth understood better than anyone how dangerous uncertainty could become inside a monarchy. A spouse could hold enormous dignity, influence, and public importance, but the direct succession line still had to remain unmistakable when power moved from one generation to the next. Royal precedence meant more than who entered a room first. It could quietly signal who carried the strongest representational weight when the sovereign or heir could not act personally, and that made even small decisions matter. Camilla challenged that boundary during a private Windsor planning meeting before a major Commonwealth reception. Only 6 people were present when she questioned why Catherine would stand beside William in a position that appeared to place the younger couple at the center of the event. The Queen Consort argued that her own place beside Charles should give her superior ceremonial authority throughout the gathering. Catherine said nothing. She remained beside the prince while Elizabeth listened carefully, allowing the disagreement to unfold just long enough to understand what it truly represented. Elizabeth ended the discussion herself. She ruled that Catherine would remain where planned because the event carried a succession element tied directly to William's future role. The decision was calm, but the impact was not. Camilla left feeling corrected in front of the small group, and the humiliation cut deeper because it came from the Queen rather than from an advisor. Catherine stayed silent afterward, unwilling to turn the ruling into a victory, while Elizabeth watched both women leave with a concern that had grown far beyond one reception. Then the night changed everything. Elizabeth waited until the room had nearly emptied before calling her private secretary back. The trusted aide had reached the door when the monarch stopped him and dictated a short instruction for the royal record. According to the later documented account attached to the decree, she made the purpose brutally clear. The line of succession must never be left open to interpretation. That first instruction would eventually become the hidden safeguard now shaking the family. Elizabeth was not trying to punish Camilla. Her deeper fear was structural. If a sovereign's spouse could automatically outrank the direct heir's household in moments of uncertainty, then a future succession crisis could create confusion exactly when the crown needed clarity most. Catherine therefore became less important as an individual than as the woman standing beside William and helping carry the next reign. Years later, Camilla finally learned that the Windsor confrontation had been recorded as the trigger behind the decree. Her sadness hardened instantly. She no longer wanted another explanation from an advisor. She wanted Charles, and when she entered the king's private rooms, restraint was already gone. Camilla had endured headlines, rejection, and years of public hostility without walking away. But this was different. This decision came from inside the monarchy, and Charles was now responsible for enforcing it. Behind closed doors, with aides deliberately dismissed, decades of loyalty collided with one brutal accusation. She did not ask whether Elizabeth had signed the decree. She asked why her own husband was allowing a dead queen's judgment to define her future. Camilla entered the king's private rooms, carrying anger that had been building since Windsor. Charles dismissed the last aide before she spoke, and the door closed on a conversation neither of them could escape. He explained that Elizabeth's decree carried her personal royal authorization and had been preserved among succession continuity instructions, formal safeguards designed to protect the order of the crown during moments of transition. The wording was not casual. It had been stored for activation when specific ceremonial conditions appeared. Charles knew what his next words would cost him. Canceling the instruction, he said, would not look like a husband protecting his wife. It would look like a reigning monarch rewriting safeguards created for the direct line of succession, simply because those safeguards now hurt someone he loved. That distinction mattered, because William's future reign depended on the crown appearing larger than private family loyalty. Yet, every word made Camilla feel smaller. Camilla reminded him of the years she had stood beside him, while duty swallowed almost everything else. She had accepted public anger, family tension, and the endless pressure of being judged before she was fully welcomed. Now, after surviving all of that, she was being told the institution still placed a boundary around her whenever the future crown was at stake. "So, I was close enough to carry the burden," she said, "but never close enough to share the future." Charles flinched, because he understood the accusation. He admitted that seeing her wounded was unbearable, but he could not place their marriage above what he believed his mother had intended for William. The prince was not simply his son in this argument. He was the next sovereign, and protecting that future had always been one of Elizabeth's deepest concerns. Then Camilla asked the question that changed the direction of the confrontation. Had William pushed for enforcement? Charles answered immediately. No. Palace lawyers had activated the decree after reviewing an upcoming ceremonial change and recognizing that its conditions had been triggered. The future king had not demanded it. Catherine had done something even more unexpected. Once she understood what enforcement would mean publicly, she had privately requested a delay. Camilla went still. The woman she had feared was benefiting from her humiliation had actually tried to slow it down. She pushed her chair backward and forced Charles to meet her eyes. "Would you accept this if our positions were reversed?" The king opened his mouth, then stopped. That silence changed everything. Because Camilla finally understood that neither William nor Catherine had built this trap. Elizabeth had. And the real battle was no longer between people. It was against a mechanism designed to survive them. The most unsettling part of Elizabeth's decree was not what it gave Catherine, it was what it prevented everyone else from doing. The late queen had constructed the instructions so carefully that affection, marriage, and even present-day pressure could not casually erase it. For Camilla, that realization was devastating. She had assumed the argument still belonged to living people. Instead, she discovered Elizabeth had anticipated the argument years before, and had already closed the door. Charles sat alone with the legal summary long after the confrontation ended. The continuity decree, as advisors now called it, was a private sovereign instruction defining ceremonial and representational precedence in narrow situations involving the heir and future sovereign. It did not make Catherine a monarch, nor did it erase Camilla's place beside the king. What it did was colder and more precise. Whenever certain crown duties touched directly on succession, the household of the future king took priority. Charles understood why that distinction mattered, but understanding did not make it easier. He knew enforcing his mother's safeguard could damage trust inside his marriage in a way no public statement could repair. Camilla had already spent years proving she could endure criticism from outside the palace. Now she was being asked to accept a limit written from within it, and the king knew that wound would not disappear simply because lawyers could explain it. Camilla felt the trap closing around her. If she challenged the decree publicly, she risked appearing to fight Elizabeth's legacy itself. Worse, she could be accused of resisting William's eventual kingship simply because the safeguard favored the direct succession line over the sovereign's spouse. Every path seemed designed to make resistance look selfish, no matter how personal her pain actually was. Then the advisors revealed the clause Elizabeth had made almost impossible to bypass. The reigning sovereign could not alter the protected order solely to benefit a husband or wife, without a formal review involving the heir. In plain terms, Charles could not simply erase the restriction for Camilla because he loved her. William would have to be part of any serious attempt to change it. William refused to weaponize that power. In a private conversation with his father, the prince made clear that he had no interest in humiliating Camilla or turning the decree into a weapon against her. But he also refused to surrender the protection. Safeguards written for the future crown, he said quietly, could not rise or fall depending on whether the family felt comfortable with them. Charles removed his glasses and stared at the final page for several seconds. Then, he closed the folder and looked toward the waiting advisor. Camilla was in the adjoining room. She heard enough, and almost immediately, the decree stopped being a private family wound. An upcoming state event had to be reorganized, forcing everyone to see Elizabeth's hidden decision move from paper into reality. For the first time, the royal order itself was about to change in public. The decree became real when a seating chart changed. No proclamation echoed through London. No palace balcony announcement was required. A single revised ceremonial plan placed Catherine where Camilla had expected to stand, and that quiet adjustment carried the force of Elizabeth's hidden instruction. For those inside the household, the symbolism was unmistakable. Camilla had not lost her marriage, her title, or her place beside Charles. But she had lost the assumption of automatic precedence. Camilla received the corrected plan from an equerry and immediately found the change. The state reception had been reorganized so that succession continuity, not spousal seniority, determined the central positions during one part of the ceremony. In simple terms, the palace was separating Charles's role as sovereign from William's position as the future king. Catherine would stand beside the prince during the succession-focused portion, while the queen consort would remain beside the king for the formal entrance. On paper, the distinction looked narrow. Emotionally, it was enormous. Camilla stared at the seating card for several seconds before sliding it back across the desk. "Has he approved this?" she asked. The equerry confirmed that Charles had seen the arrangement. Her face tightened, but she did not argue with the messenger. "So, this is how it begins," she said quietly. The words carried more sadness than anger, because the decree was no longer hidden inside a folder. It was now changing where she stood. Catherine reacted very differently when the revised plan reached her. She understood why the new order existed, but she also saw how easily it could be turned into humiliation. The princess asked advisors to remove any unnecessary symbolism that might make the arrangement look like a public defeat for Camilla. She wanted the required positions respected, without turning them into a spectacle. Yet even that restraint could not hide the larger reality. Elizabeth's safeguard was now visible through action. Palace staff received careful instructions not to describe the change as a demotion. Nobody was to suggest that Camilla had been stripped of her existing dignity or removed from Charles's side. Still, those working closest to the event understood what had happened. The decree had been activated for the first time in a way the family could physically feel. Camilla made one final appeal to Charles before the reception. "Restore the old arrangement," she asked, "just this once." The king refused. If he ignored the instruction the first moment it became uncomfortable, he said, then every safeguard his mother created would become meaningless. That answer ended the argument, but not the pain. Then Catherine made a decision nobody expected. After the event, she asked to meet Camilla alone. No Charles, no William, no advisors. And what happened behind that closed door did not deepen the rivalry. It began to dismantle it. There were no courtiers in the room, no legal advisors, and no husbands positioned between them. Catherine had asked for that deliberately. She knew every official conversation would turn the decree into protocol, and every public gesture would be interpreted as victory or defeat. So she faced Camilla privately and stripped the issue down to something painfully human. One woman had been elevated by Elizabeth's decision, and another had been wounded by it. What followed changed the emotional direction of the crisis. Catherine spoke first because she knew silence would only make the distance between them worse. She explained that she had learned the full meaning of the decree only when its activation became unavoidable, and that she had never asked Elizabeth to place her above Camilla. Institutional precedence, she added, was different from personal respect. It defined who carried certain duties connected to the future crown, but it did not give her permission to treat the king's wife as lesser inside the family. Camilla listened without interrupting, but the hurt did not disappear. She admitted that seeing Catherine's name protected in Elizabeth's handwriting had reopened an old fear she thought years of service had finally buried. No matter how much she supported Charles, no matter how much criticism she endured, part of her still feared she would always be seen as the tolerated outsider. The decree had made that insecurity feel permanent. Catherine did not dismiss the pain. She told Camilla that inheriting Elizabeth's protection was not simple for her either. She had not participated in the old Windsor confrontation, had not written the safeguard, and had never asked to become the symbol of another woman's limitation. Yet now every future ceremony could make it appear that she had personally won something from Camilla. Camilla finally asked the question that mattered most. Would Catherine give the advantage up? Catherine paused before answering. She would never accept a public humiliation of Camilla, she said, and she would resist any attempt to turn the decree into a personal weapon. But she could not erase a safeguard Elizabeth had written for William and the future crown, simply because carrying it had become uncomfortable. The answer was gentle, but firm. Camilla studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted. She would stop contesting the decree. Her condition was simple. It could never be used as proof that Catherine had defeated her, replaced her, or deserved respect at her expense. The princess agreed immediately. Neither woman smiled, but the tension in the room finally changed shape. Catherine reached toward the copy of the decree resting on the table, then stopped before touching it. She left the document exactly where it was. Camilla noticed. The smallest nod followed. By the time Charles and William learned what had happened, the private battle had already cooled. But outside the palace gates, the story was exploding. and Elizabeth's hidden decision was about to become the only royal argument Britain wanted to discuss. By morning, the private hierarchy of the House of Windsor had become a national spectacle. Commentators argued over what Elizabeth intended, newspapers turned Catherine and Camilla into opposing symbols, and crowds gathered hoping to witness the new order for themselves. Yet one moment cut through all the noise. When the royal family appeared together, after the decree became public, nobody needed a constitutional expert to explain what had changed. The arrangement spoke for itself. Camilla watched the coverage in private and felt the argument slipping beyond anyone's control. Palace communications had confirmed the existence of Elizabeth's continuity instruction, while stressing that she remained the king's wife and that Catherine's precedence applied only to defined future crown functions. Those functions were duties tied directly to the heir and the next reign, not a blanket transfer of every privilege. But nuance disappeared quickly. Once the story reached television screens and front pages, Catherine felt the same discomfort from the opposite direction. Broadcasters framed the decree as Elizabeth's attempt to prevent uncertainty between the sovereign's spouse and the household of the direct heir. Yet some coverage reduced that careful distinction to a simple contest. The princess watched herself described as the winner of a battle she had never chosen. Camilla saw decades of struggle compressed into Camilla versus Kate. Both women understood how easily pain could become entertainment once the public believed there had to be a victor. Then one front page captured the frenzy. Outside a London newsstand, a fictional edition carried the enormous headline, "Elizabeth's Final Order, Kate First." People gathered near Buckingham Palace, photographing the paper, debating what the words meant, and waiting for the family's next appearance. The phrase was dramatic, simple, and brutal. It turned a narrow succession safeguard into a national verdict. Catherine knew the next public moment would matter more than any palace statement. When the family appeared together, she moved toward the position assigned beside William under the new order. Before taking it, however, she stopped beside Camilla and greeted her warmly. For a brief second, the tension everyone expected was replaced by something quieter. The princess touched her arm, then moved forward without triumph. Camilla understood the gesture immediately. Catherine was accepting the position without accepting the humiliation attached to it. The queen consort did not step back in anger. She held her place beside Charles and allowed the moment to pass without resistance. That single exchange changed the tone of the story. The public had seen the hierarchy. They had also seen that the two women were refusing to perform the rivalry being written for them. Now everything came back to Charles. He would not overturn Elizabeth's decree, but he still had to define exactly what it meant for Camilla, for William, for Catherine, and for the monarchy itself. The public had seen the new order. Now the king had to decide whether it would leave his family fractured or become the boundary that finally ended the rivalry. In the end, nobody was stripped of everything, nobody stormed away from the monarchy, and nobody could claim complete victory. The truth was more powerful than that. Elizabeth's hidden decree had done exactly what she intended. It separated personal love from dynastic authority. Catherine emerged with unmistakable protection as the woman standing beside the future king. Camilla remained beside Charles, but with one boundary finally made permanent. And after days of anger, the family stopped fighting the reality. Charles brought the matter to its final conclusion inside the family. He confirmed that Elizabeth's decree would remain in force exactly as written, protecting Catherine's precedence whenever ceremonies or duties were directly tied to succession and representation of the future crown. At the same time, the king made another point equally clear. Camilla's place beside him would not be treated as disposable, nor would the decree become an excuse to humiliate her publicly. The boundary was narrow, but it was now permanent. Camilla finally accepted what she had resisted from the beginning. Elizabeth had never intended to erase her. But neither had the late queen intended marriage to Charles to place her above the direct future of the monarchy. That distinction still hurt, but it no longer felt like a personal attack from Catherine. The queen consort had seen enough to understand that the younger woman had not created the rule, celebrated it, or tried to use it against her. Catherine accepted the outcome with the same restraint she had shown throughout the crisis. The authority protected for her carried responsibility, not triumph. She would stand beside William when the future crown required it, but she would not treat that position as proof that another woman had lost. For the princess, the decree became less about status and more about carrying the weight Elizabeth believed the next reign would eventually demand. William understood the deeper purpose better than anyone. His grandmother had not been choosing one woman she loved over another. She had been preventing private relationships from blurring the succession line after her death. The prince knew that family affection could change, loyalties could shift, and marriages could become complicated. The crown could not depend on any of those things. Charles finally gave Camilla the answer his earlier silence had denied her. He would honor their marriage, protect her dignity, and remain beside her. But he would also protect William and Catherine's future position exactly as his mother had instructed. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his words. Camilla stopped challenging the decree. Catherine refused to weaponize it. William accepted its protection. Charles enforced it. The hierarchy was settled. The king closed the decree, placed it back into its royal case, and left with Camilla beside him. William and Catherine followed. They were moving in the same direction now, even if the crown did not place them on equal ground. Elizabeth's decree did not destroy Camilla or crown Catherine early. It did something more lasting. It made clear that affection may shape a royal family, but succession defines a monarchy. And when the moment came to choose between personal comfort and the future crown, Elizabeth had already made the decision for them all. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.